Okay, welcome to the final class on colorful profiles. Today we'll be talking about heroes and hostages. The Jewish people have a long and storied history with hostage situations, being in captivity, most notably starting with being slaves for the Egyptians for many, many, many years. And Joseph was sold, and that's basically how it started. But today we'll be discussing the different heroic moments in that history, um, and we'll learn a lot from it to apply to contemporary to the situation that we find ourselves in today. Um, just the background of the value of redeeming hostages, redeeming captives that we have in Judaism, right? The very well established, a very well established, a very well established Torah on this. Um, so let's look at the what would you say the one of the most important mitzvahs? Well, now you can guess, but what's the most important mitzvah that you can think of, right? If you could think of a mitzvah, is it Shabbos, kosher, Torah study, prayer, charity? If you were to think of a mitzvah that was supersedes all mitzvahs, the mitzvah of mitzvahs, say redeeming hostages, and that's exactly how it's referred to in the Shulchan Aruch and the Talmud and all the Jewish sources, redeeming hostages. Tzedakah, very good. Yeah, tzedakah is it's so great that it's even called mitzvah without any other qualifications. It's just called mitzvah. When someone says mitzvah, it means tzedakah. And but we'll see that, this is like the epitome of tzedakah, right? So tzedakah this is like tzedakah on steroids. It's tzedakah that will save someone's life, right? So let's read the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, on page 145. The way that it talks about and interesting, the Code of Jewish Law does not have any laws that are not relevant to modern Judaism. He didn't include laws of the sacrifices and things like that, but he did include laws of redeeming captives because it was something that was actually relevant. The redemption of captives takes priority over sustaining the poor and providing them with clothing. There is no greater mitzvah than redeeming the captives. If we ignore the redemption of captives, we transgress the following prohibitions. Keep track of this. You shall not harden your heart to the needy. You shall not shut your hand to the needy. You shall not stand by while your fellow's life is in danger. Right? That's lo samod al dam re'echa. That's the mitzvah that you have to save someone's life. The other one is you may not allow a worker to be oppressed ruthlessly. In neglecting to redeem captives, we also negate the following proactive mitzvot. You shall surely open your hand to your needy fellow. Your brother shall live with you financially. Who recognizes that verse? V'chai imach. V'chai achicha imach. That was from last week's parsha. The rabbi had said a sermon about that. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's a famous verse. Rescue those taken for death. That's from Mishlei. And many similar statements. If we delay redeeming captives when it is possible to hasten, it is as if we are spilling blood in every added moment. So this is a very, very, very big, big mitzvah. Try to identify the scriptural values that compose this, that make up this mitzvah on exercise 4.1. Try to get four of these values that come out from those verses. It's not all one value, right? You saw, right, or mentioned charity, that's clearly there. There's other values. Give you a second. So we saw the verse, you shall not harden your heart. You shall not shut your hand. You should surely open your hand to your needy fellow. Your brother shall live with you, right? Meaning financially, you should sustain him. That all falls under the charity, the value of charity, right? Giving of yourself to help another Jew. You shall not stand by when your fellow's life is in danger. Rescue those taken for death. It is as if we are spilling blood every moment. That is the value of saving lives. Pikuach nefesh. Then we see you may not allow a worker to be oppressed ruthlessly. That is the prevention of slavery. So we have the as a value, we do not we try to prevent someone to be abused or enslaved. Okay? So with these values, that this is what informs the attitude practically on the ground that we're about to see play out. This is really its backbone. And we'll see later in the course that without these values, you really don't have the basis on which to sustain some of the things we're about to see, some of the credible heroism. Okay. So let's talk about our first study. Love your I forgot the last time, probably the most critical piece to this. Love your fellow, love your neighbor as yourself. You have to l'reacha kamocha, to have an extra level of affinity towards another Jew, to treat him as yourself. That is a that's a big motivation for redeeming captives. So let's talk about the 4 captives. So we'll set the historical stage. The second temple in Jerusalem, we talked about this period a few times. It was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 CE. And then we basically brought an end to the Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. And under the Roman occupation and persecution, the remaining Torah sages in Israel, they were called Tanaim, right? They're the ones who wrote the Mishnah, or they're represented in the Mishnah. They went on a big project to go and write the Mishnah and write the oral tradition of Jewish law down. In order, they did this to guarantee the survival of Torah knowledge and the Jewish people while they were being dispersed and wandering around the world, as we saw in the last course. So when they finished writing the Mishnah in Israel in the 3rd century, you basically have a shift of the Jewish center. Where's the Torah center of the world? Where's the Jewish center of the world? It goes to Babylonia, Iraq. Okay, so Judaism, now it's in Borough Park, but it used to be in Babylonia. Okay, so they were called Amoraim. That generation was called Amoraim. They were saying over the Mishnayos and then interpreting and expounding on them. That's why they're called Amoraim, right? So they made the Talmud, which is expounding, right? Check out the last course if you want more detailed information. So as the age of the Talmud comes to an end in like the 5th century, Babylonia was the center for a really long time of Jewish learning. You have the Gaonim, and they lasted for a long time. The yeshivas, we said, that were still in the Talmud, they still had those yeshivas. 1,000 years later, there was still learning in those yeshivas. Rabbi Hai, the Gaonim, Rabbi Hai Gaon, these Gaonim were very, they were any community that existed outside of Babylonia, like in Spain or in Italy or wherever, they depended on the Gaonim's knowledge to make halachic decisions, to know how to rule. They had to write to the Gaonim, and basically that was where they went to go. That's where they shopped for Torah knowledge, was in Babylonia. Okay, that they were the exporters. You had to import it from Babylonia. Okay, in the second part of the millennium, right? You have the Jewish communities growing across the Mediterranean, in North Africa, in Spain, and in other countries. And like I said, the Gaonim remained the highest authorities in the Jewish world. So they kind of needed them. They were very dependent on the yeshivos in Bavel, in Babylonia. If you wanted to learn anything you needed to go to Babylonia in order to become a scholar. You didn't have the resources at home that you would max them out pretty quickly. You could see in page 148 a manuscript of a responsum that's sent from Rabbi Sharira and Rabbi Hai Gaon from Egypt to Egypt. They were sent by those Gaonim to Egypt. So you see that communication over there. I guess it was found in the Geniza. But by the beginning of the millennium, the pendulum is starting to swing. The Jewish communities in North Africa, Spain, and Central Europe became fully independent of Bavel. They had their own sages they had their own serious scholars, and they were able to, like the Rambam was from Spain, right? He wasn't writing letters to the Gaonim. In fact, the Rambam spoke about the Gaonim in a very irreverent sort of way compared to how they would have been spoken about earlier in the Rambam. So they kind of took their independence. They started becoming their own people. So what led to this shift? But mostly it was the breakdown of the system in Babylonia. There were internal problems, and it just wasn't working well. And eventually and then people started moving away from Babylonia. So the Torah Center kind of, democratized and shifts and decentralizes over the time. But Muslims started conquering more lands, and that became, better places to live. Then, they didn't have to stay in Iraq. So that's the main like factor. But there is a big point in Jewish history. The story that we're about to see is actually it actually marks one of the big turning points and shifts from the Jews being very Babylonia centered to being very localized and having the Torah authority in their own country. So this story is recorded.
What years would that be?
We are talking about right now. We're going to be from the story we're about to say is like in the year 1000-ish. Yeah, the CE. Yeah. We're talking about 1000, a little before that, 900, something like that. I think like 900, something like that. Yeah.
Well, Rashi was around 1100.
Rashi was one. Rashi was
Sorry, 12, around 1200. Okay.
And here it says free run. Chaigon is about 1005.
okay. So Rav Haigon, yeah, okay. We'll see a time. We'll see more. Yeah. So this story that we're gonna read is going to be is recorded by Rabbi Avraham ibn Daud, and we talked about him before. He was born in Toledo, Spain. He was a historian, an astronomer, all sorts of goodies, and a Torah scholar, and he lived 150 years after what he's writing about. But he's descended from he had a very strong connection with the Jews in Spain, in the history of Spain. He's descended from some of the people that he writes about. So he had a very good working knowledge of what we spoke about him. He wrote about Shmuel HaNagid also. Okay, so he's describing events 150 years before. So it's on page 149. He talks about the journey of 4 rabbis who are journeying out of, they're leaving Spain. So let's look and read his words. It was brought about by God that the income of the yeshiva, which used to come from Spain, the hand of, we're going to see we're going to have a map for these places, so don't worry about what they are. The land of Maghreb, Africa, and Egypt and the Holy Land was discontinued. The following were the circumstances that brought this about. So they were traveling, they were trying to go to a convention or something. He's going to say Ibn Rumahis, the commander of the fleet. He was like an admiral of a fleet in Spain. So he worked for basically the Spanish government, the Muslim Spanish government, and his job. The commander of the fleet left Cordoba, leaving. Having been sent by the Muslim king of Spain, Abd al-Rahman al-Nasir, this commander of a mighty fleet, set out to capture the ships of the Christians and the towns that were close to the coast. So his job was to capture anybody who's on a boat that's owned by a Christian, and to raid the towns that were on the coast to basically make sure that they become Muslim or whatever his job was. So they sailed as far as the coast of the land of Israel and swung about to the Greek Sea and the islands therein. Here they encountered a ship carrying 4 great scholars who were traveling from a city in Bari to a city called Safastin, and who were on their way to a convention. Ibn Rumahis captured the ship and took the sages prisoner. One of them was Rabbi Hushiel, the father of Rabbeinu Hananel, Another was Rabbi Moshe, the father of Rabbi Chanoch, who was taken prisoner with his wife and his son. Rabbi Chanoch, who was then but a young lad. The third was Rabbi Shmaria ben Rabbi Elchanan, and the fourth, I do not know his name. Something really bad happened to the wife of that guy. She didn't survive this ordeal, but these sages did not tell a soul about themselves or their wisdom. So they pretended they hid their identities. The commander told Rabbi Shmaria in Alexandria.
He sold.
He didn't tell a soul.
No, he sold, Rabbi. It says commander sold, Rabbi.
The commander sold Rabbi Shmaria in Alexandria of Egypt. Rabbi Shmaria proceeded to Fostat. So they sold him somewhere in Egypt, and then he went to Fostat, where he became head of the yeshiva. He then sold Rabbi Chushiel on the coast of Ifrika. From there, the rabbi proceeded to the city of Kerion, which was the mightiest of all Muslim cities in the land of Maghreb, where he became, it's like North Africa, where he became the head of the yeshiva, where he begot his son, Rabbeinu Hananel. Rabbeinu Hananel is a very important and famous, Tosafist scholar. The commander then arrived at Cordoba, where he sold Rabbi Moshe along with Rabbi Chanoch. This affair occurred in the days of Rabbi Shirira Gaon, about 990 CE. So we were close, somewhat more or less. Okay, so this is 990. So you have on figure 4.1 and page 151 the map of the four captives saga. So see their travels. So they were intercepted by pirates and taken captive. They kept their status as rabbis, and then they were sold to Jewish communities across the Mediterranean. He didn't clarify that, but yes, Jews bought them, obviously at a good bargain, because they were not known to be scholars. They looked like, regular people, which is the way that they always traveled back then, because you don't advertise that you're a Torah sage. They knew better than that.
Sold to Jewish communities, like ransoming,
Well, they were sold as slaves. They said, "Hey, we have some of your people," and they paid them. Yeah, they paid them, and they got them. This guy, Rabbi Shmaryahu, actually, I'm sorry, Shmiria. They actually just discovered, just recently, like 6 months ago, I saw it published, his explanation of Shir Hashirim, the Song of Songs, also in the Cairo Geniza. So things are still coming out from there. So Rabbi Yehuda Seawald, if you look that up, he has a whole website on things that he puts out, that he publishes this stuff. It is in Hebrew. So I read some of it. It's really cool. So they were going from Italy, right? The scholars were going from Italy, it seems like. And they were traveling to Tunisia. They weren't really they seem to have been intercepted as they were traveling across the Mediterranean. And I don't understand why the pirates sold. I'm not sure why the pirates had to sell them in 4 different countries. I don't know why you couldn't. I guess they didn't want to buy all of them in one shot.
Bulk pricing is not as good as individual pricing.
I guess so.
That was the best prices for them when they got them. Maybe they tried to sell them elsewhere and didn't get good.
Yeah, that's what it's. I mean, that's an interesting point. I don't know. I just thought of that now. Like, why did they go from Egypt to why did they have to sell them in 4 different spots? But there's actually a spiritual reason that's given for this. It's interesting to note, by the way, that these captive soldiers were scholars were complete strangers to the redeeming Jewish communities. They didn't even know they were scholars. They thought they were just random Jews that they're buying off a boat. It was just like so natural, and it's just like the thing to do, right? You're going to see some Jewish people, you'll buy them. You guys should do the same. If you ever see any Jewish people on Amazon or anything, make sure that you click yes.
Well, what the ratings are,
Yeah, look at the rating, look at the reviews. All they knew was they were Jews and they had an obligation to redeem them. The second part of the story that we'll read now teaches us about the effects of this episode. This focuses more on Rabbi Moshe in Cordoba. The Ravad, the guy who wrote this, he clearly knew more about Rabbi Moshe because he's from Cordoba. Because his grandfather was a student of this Rabbi Chanoch, right? Rabbi Moshe, the guy who's writing this, was a student. His grandfather was a student of Chanoch, so he knew more about this. So let's read the details in that. That's on page 153. Rabbi Moshe was redeemed by the people of Cordoba, who were under the impression that he was a man of no education. Now in Cordoba, there was a synagogue that was called Knesset, Hamidrash, the study gathering hall, where a judge by the name of Rabbi Nassan the Pious, who was a man of distinction, used to preside. So this guy, Rabbi Nassan the Pious, was Nassan the Chassid, who was called. He was in charge of the place. Rabbi Moshe. So this is a newly redeemed guy, Rabbi Moshe. No one knows who he is. He was seated, he was just sitting in the back of the shul in the corner like an attendant, and he rose before Rabbi Nassan and challenged an interpretation that Rabbi Nassan was given. When Rabbi Nassan and his students heard Rabbi Moshe's words, they marveled to each other and asked him to explain the law to them. This he did quite properly. Then each of them posed to him all the difficulties that they had, and he replied to them with his abundant wisdom. Right? They cherished it. They saw this guy as like a bright light, is coming to their community. So outside the study hall, there were litigants who were not permitted to enter until the students have completed their lesson. On that day, Rabbi Nassan, the judge, walked out, and the litigants followed him. However, he said to them, I am no longer judge. The man who is dressed in rags and is a stranger is my master, and I shall be his disciple from this day on. You ought to appoint him judge of the community of Cordoba. And that is exactly what they did. The community then assigned Rabbi Moshe a large stipend and honored him with expensive garments and a Rolls-Royce carriage. At that point, the commander wished to retract his sale. The pirates guy, he said, hey, you guys ripped me off. Maybe that's why he didn't sell the other three. you guys, hey, this is a raw deal. You have a king in your midst. Like, I could have taken you for all your money. He's obviously worth a lot. However, the king did not permit him to do so. He wasn't allowed to retract, for he was delighted by the fact that the Jews of his domain no longer needed the people of Babylonia. So that's a big indication that this is a big piece of the independence of the Jewish people from Babylonia. Having a scholar of his caliber enabled that city to kind of be on their own feet as Torah scholars. And that's of interest to the king, because we don't want Jews having, this place that's like another country that's where the Jews need to go in order to get any education or anything like that. It's good just that it's local, that it stays here. The report of this spread throughout the land of Spain and the Maghreb, and the students came to study under Rabbi Moshe. Moreover, all questions which had formerly been addressed to the academies of Babylonia were now directed to him. It's probably more gradual and less extreme than it's probably a little exaggerated, but this is a contributing factor. The communities of the west and the east did not resume the sending of gifts to the academies in Babylonia, because these scholars raised many disciples, and the knowledge of the Talmud spread throughout the world. So this release had a major impact on the Jewish world and the Torah world. And it spread. It spread all over the place, this impact. So yeah.
Where was Babylon both living? Because he was living in Italy or Babylonia?
Originally, it seems like he was living, I think he was originally traveling from Italy, right? But I guess that's not where he was based. I guess he was originally but they were traveling to a convention somewhere. It seems like Bari was a very big Torah center
it's translated as Spain.
Right. So there was a big Torah center in Bari. Yeah, there was a big Torah center in Bari at the time. It says here Italy. Bari, Italy.
Well, I'm just looking at on page 149 at the Hebrews Medinat Bari, which is from Spain, it says.
Oh, interesting. I'm not sure why it does that. Okay.
Which is-
Yeah, it's right there. I mean,
So-
it really is,
okay.
not like I'm a scholar.
You can read, right?
Bear with-
So there's a few.
That's fine.
So this debate with scholars. So some scholars apparently maintained that these people originated from Babylonia.
Okay.
They were spending time in those other places, but their base was in Babylonia. That's what most scholars contend, and that the story must be amended to reflect this. So the scholars say that they must have been from Babylonia, and that whatever it says in the story that they originated somewhere else is not accurate. So take it or leave it. I don't know. Sometimes they try to amend things to fit their narratives.
Right.
But we don't need the narrative. That's not even the point.
Yeah, but they're not here, sorry.
Yeah, okay. We'll figure it out later. So it's interesting to see how it's described, how his rise to fame is described by Ibn Daud on page 153. The way that he describes it and the way that he sees the divine, he points to the divine providence that came out from it. That was at play here. Rabbi Moshe was redeemed by the people of Cordoba who were under. Oh, we read that already. Sorry. Sorry. That's sorry. It's 155. Rabbi Moshe Avigdor Amital is a historian. He's a contemporary historian, and he points to this as a turning point in Jewish history and something that actually sustained and pumped life into the Torah, into the Jewish world. As the sun set on the yeshivas of Sura and Pumbedisa in Babylonia, those were the two massive Torah powerhouses, Torah factories in Bavel, the world was desolate, and it seemed that Torah was set to be forgotten because there was a breakdown of the yeshiva. But then, precisely at this critical time, the Torah spread to all corners of the earth, reaching as far as Egypt and Africa, Spain and France. For God has left us a remnant, the 4 captives. Divine providence arranged that these men be taken captive and sold as slaves in the 4 corners of the world in order to spread Torah even to distant lands. Anyone who looks with open eyes will see that this jug of oil, quote unquote, the Torah, has not yet emptied. For this miracle continues to repeat itself in our days. Just as the Jewish people are eternal, so is this jug of oil eternal. Moreover, the eternity of the Torah is the root of the eternity of the Jewish people. So these 4 people were spread around the world, inexplicably, really, right? They, why did they get sold to all these different countries? They set up massive Torah centers. Everyone flocks to them. We didn't see it about the other people, but we saw it about Rabbi Moshe. So
that was just as successful in their newfound.
that's Rabbi Amital's assumption here. I don't know anything about those guys, honestly, but it's a fact that that's what happened. I mean, that's the Rambam's teacher, the Rif, Rabbi Alfas, the Spanish Torah knowledge is like incredible. Like what happened, and so there's definitely tremendous outgrowth of Torah scholarship from these events. So you can mark this as a catalyst of the era of Rishonim, right? The Rishonim are after the Gaonim, right? Those are the rabbis that are after the Gaonim, and the Rishonim were so successful and so great that people really forgot about the Gaonim. They overshadowed the Gaonic period completely. They kind of made them irrelevant in a sense, even though they were continuing from them. But they made such an impact on Torah study that it was like a whole new era of Torah scholarship. Yeah.
So after these guys are the Achronim, right?
After the Rishonim is the Achronim, which we're still in that period because we never really.
Right. I've always, like people like of course it's not the case that Maimonides or Ramban or Nachmanides, all these people are homegrown. They just came into this knowledge on their own.
No.
They all had, but
Their teachers are from originally from Bavel. Yeah.
I've never heard of them from. I've never really studied the lineages of any of these people, the Rashis or Maimonides.
Yeah.
Or Nachmanides.
So Rambam actually gives his lineage, not his physical lineage, but his rabbinic lineage, in his in the beginning of his halachic book. He tells you his all his teachers and all the way up till he actually goes to Moses.
Which book is that?
Mishnah Torah. Okay, so now we're gonna look at another situation about his name is this is Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg. Very fascinating story. Very remarkable saga here. He was taken captive in 13th century in Germany. Um, this is just a video. Let's just watch this here.
Don't have an exact year of birth for Mayor of Rothenburg, which is very common in the medieval period. There were no birth certificates or other certificates. We believe he was born somewhere between 1215 and 1220 something. He was originally from Worms in the Rhineland, and that's where he's buried to this day, because there were not a lot of great scholars left in Germany at that particular time. Mayor of Rothenburg went to France. He went to northern France, where he studied with a series of very important Tosafists, those who commented on the Talmud and on Rashi's commentary to the Talmud. That started in the 12th century. He got there somewhere, we know when he was there, he got there somewhere around 1230 or 40, again, depending on when he was born. And his most important teacher there was someone named Rabbi Yechiel of Paris. And that's important for a number of reasons, aside from Rabbi Yechiel being a great Torah scholar. Mayor of Rothenburg was apparently in Paris when the Talmud was burned in the year 1242. That was the result of the so-called trial of the Talmud in 1240. Not that it was all disaster. There were plenty of good Torah study. And in that respect, Mayor of Rothenburg took in this French Tosafist method of study of comparing texts and resolving texts. Rothenburg was not his original hometown. Rothenburg was in south central Germany. He seems to have gone there once he came back from northern France. Maharam very quickly becomes the Gadol Hador, the leading Torah scholar of his generation. Again, not just because there weren't many others, but he really distinguished himself. Already in the 1240s, the trial of the Talmud, which Maharam witnessed, it's the 1240s. As we move forward, the Jews in northern France are under tremendous economic pressure, meaning money is owed to them, debts are canceled, so their livelihoods are basically threatened to the core. There are physical persecutions, there are attempts at conversion. Again, the rulers, some of them try to provide some security, servi camerae, serfs of the chamber. The king will protect the Jews, but these protections, and France and Germany are a little different here, but these protections don't always hold up. And many of the questions that Maharam received were questions about things that happened during conversionary efforts. So again, on the basis of all the earlier persecutions, Maharam was not, in that sense, jumping ship. It was pikuach nefesh. Maharam believed that his life was in danger. Whether he knew somehow that he might be captured or something else is purely speculative. But in any case, Maharam begins, he leaves Germany. Apparently, Maharam was on the way to Israel. What we know for sure is that he moves eastward. He's in Germany, which is sort of the center of the Holy Roman Empire. As you move southeast, you get to Italy, right? The Alps, however you cross, however you go around. And apparently in 1286, this we have some contemporary documentation, Maharam, he apparently had stopped there to wait for others to come with him to follow. And
The contemporary documentation that he's talking about is on page 158.
Maharam was captured by agents of the Holy Roman Emperor, by agents of the King of Germany, who also had control of this area of Italy. Again, there are suggestions that somebody informed on Maharam or informed them that Maharam, again, great scholars had to travel incognito. You could ask the question, is this mainly anti-Semitism? Is this mainly economic? Is this mainly political? And the answer to that question is yes. All of the above. They were looking for the economic benefits. They were looking for the anti-Jewish benefits. They were looking for the political benefits, showing who's in charge. In any case, Maharam at that point is captured, and he is brought back by the Holy Roman Emperor to Germany, where he is put in at least one or two more quote-unquote fortresses. These are not prisons in the Rikers Island sense, if I can say that. These are not prisons where you're treated horribly. He's a political prisoner. He's an economic prisoner. In other words, the capture was done so that the Jews would pay large sums of money to try to get Maharam out.
It's just interesting. He talked about the contemporary documentation. The papers that they found that talk about this story are actually were found in the synagogue in 1615 when there was the synagogue in Worms was destroyed. The Jews, when they rebuilt it after the building their communities, they found these papers in the ruins that document. They were actually it was actually a book about the different customs in the city, but they documented the story in it. So you can read. It's very the details that are in there are more than what he said. This professor. But it talks about how they were crossing the sea, which was like a way of saying they were going to Israel. That was the in the medieval times that's how they said we're going to the Holy Land. We're crossing the sea. So he wrote they were crossing the sea with his daughter, son-in-law, all his possessions. He arrived in a city in the high mountains known as Lombardische Gebirge. The Gebirge. What? Gebirge. The Lombard Alps. And he wanted to travel. He stayed there at a rest stop in the mountains, and a wicked bishop of Basel rode down from Rome through the city. And with him, he had one of his servants was a Jew named Knepi. How do you say it? Knepele. Yeah, a knepel is like yeah. I thought it was the thing on top of the lulav that
Oh, yeah.
the pinched thing. Yeah. Either way. So they saw him. He knew who he was. Knepele, he knew that this was Mayor Rothenburg. I guess he was pretty famous by then in the Jewish world. So he knew I guess he saw that he could make some money. He went to the count and the lord of that city. They arrested him on the 4th of Tammuz in the year 46 in the 6th millennium, and they hand him over to King Rudolph. Okay, so 4th of Tammuz, he's sent to the king, and clearly money was a big factor here because they didn't torture him or anything. They just put him in this institution. They kept him there, and they demanded a large ransom. So he did an interesting thing. So we talked about the value of ransom and how important it is to the Jewish people. So obviously that was what they were going to do. And he was one of the leaders of the Jewish people. He was like the biggest rabbi at the time. So obviously you're going to pay whatever it takes. But he quoted the Talmud in Gittin on page 159, where it says, "For the sake of society at large, captives are not redeemed for more than their actual monetary value. The reason for this is so that the captors will not seize additional captives. If you incentivize something, it will happen more." And he saw that he did not want to put his peers at risk. He didn't want to put the Jewish people at risk. So he said, don't pay these people. There's another reason given that the Jews are it's going to destroy our livelihoods. And if we just have to pay all the time. But that's not the main reason. The main reason is it's going to encourage more kidnapping, because this is imagine if you found out that there's a group of people that would literally pay anything in order to get one of their brothers out of jail. That's very bad position. So the Talmud banned it basically, which is incredible in and of itself, which is like, we're so connected to each other. We're so empathetic that we have to restrict overpaying each other because it's going to cause it's a beautiful thing. I love that law. It's a great law. It's like you're too nice. You're going to hurt yourself. Anyway, so he refused the ransom. This is a very big act of self-sacrifice. Obviously, he had a lot of things that he could have done with his life instead of sitting in this captivity. But he held that this is what he needed to do. Rabbi Shlomo Luria, the Marshal, who was actually quite a good historian, he had very good, very reliable. He wrote about this also. I heard about, on page 160, I heard about Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, who was imprisoned in the fortress of Einsensheim for several years, and the ruler demanded a large sum from the communities for his release. The communities wished to ransom Rabbi Meir, but he refused, arguing that captives should not be redeemed for more than their worth. His reasoning must have been that if the communities would ransom, it may incentivize other rulers to do the same and hold other prominent Torah scholars hostage for exorbitant ransoms. Eventually, the wealth of the entire Jewish people would not suffice to ransom them, and the Torah would be forgotten among the Jewish people. Here is the proof that he was right. After this case, the rulers stopped seizing sages and holding them for ransom. Right? It didn't work so well. Hey, look, no one's bailing out this rabbi. They must not care that much about him. Right? So, not a good investment. Anyways, Rabbi Meir remained in prison for 7 years. Over the years, his conditions improved somewhat. And during his last years, his students were actually able to visit him and study. So he wasn't wasting away in this confinement, right? He wasn't able to have a yeshiva, the likes of which he should have had, but at least he was able to put out his Torah and responsa. A lot of the responsa that we have from him were, in fact, written during this period. In one of his responsa written in prison, Rabbi Meir writes poignantly about his suffering in prison and the devotion to Torah that kept him going. In text 8 on page 162. When I am released to safety, I will gladly ensure that you receive a copy of my commentary on the sections of the Mishnah and Zeraim and Taharos. During my imprisonment, I have not forgotten my Creator, and I have remained devoted to His Torah and fear of heaven. And he signs it from the soul obedient to your command, the impoverished, the individual forgotten of all goodness, the downtrodden doormat, once known as Meir, the son of Rabbi Baruch of blessed memory. So the doormat formerly known as Rabbi Meir. That is a great signature, except that he probably felt that way, and it would be just a joke if we did that. Yeah. What?
Yours formerly known as Prince.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was saying. Okay. Right.
Oh, Rabbi Meir and
The Maharam Rothenburg.
okay, Maharam, because I confused you, because there was Marshall was Luria.
Oh, Marshall is someone else.
Yeah.
Maharam.
So I couldn't see Maharam anywhere in this.
Right. That was right. Maharshal is a much later halachic authority that wrote about.
He wrote this.
This is the Maharam, Meir Rothenburg.
Then,
Oh, the other one.
60,
Yeah, page 6.
Marshall wrote this.
The Maharshal wrote his own account, his own recording of the version of events that he got it. Okay, beautiful. So he was obviously extremely devoted till the end. He actually died in prison after 7 years in the year 1293. But guess what? They kept his body in prison. Okay, because that's it. You know, if you're not going to pay for, maybe if you weren't going to bail him out when he's alive, maybe you'll bail him out when he's dead. So they kept his body and they demanded a big ransom in order for release. He said it sounds familiar. Yes. The community refused. They were following their Rebbe's advice, even post-mortem, which is, again, another trait that they didn't expect from the Jews. We're going to listen to him even when he's dead, because he made a good point and his halacha is binding. Anyways, his body remained there for another 14 years. Now, during this time, I might add, it was not like they just gave up on getting him out. They were negotiating. Right? They just didn't want to pay like $2 million for him because of his ruling. But if they can get them down to a reasonable, ask, then they would redeem him. So this entire time they were lobbying and negotiating and fundraising and trying to come up with a way to get him out. So it wasn't like they just left him there. And we'll see now how, by the way, in page 163, you see this manuscript page, which is illustrated with a picture of Meir Rothenburg. It's authored, it's called, it's just like, that's an ancient, not ancient, it's from 470. So it's one of the students he was writing about. No, not students. The Maharam.
Oh, so that's where. So
Yeah.
they put that in here.
Maharam Rothenburg, yeah. Anyways, in 1307, a wealthy Jew from Frankfurt, his name was Alexander Wimpin. Okay, very he's a big tzaddik. He brokered a deal to get the body out, right? And it's interesting. They buried Rabbi Meir's body. They put up a tombstone, and he died a few days later. Apparently, was it days or I don't know how long it was. Um, he passed away pretty quickly after he saved. Um, we'll read about it it's in the gravestone inscription, right? So the gravestone is on page 164, right? It says, the first one, it says, this monument is for our master and teacher, Rabbi Meir, the son of Rabbi Baruch. They didn't write the thing that he called himself, but he was captured by the king of the Roman Empire on the 4th day of Tammuz in the year 46 of the 6th millennium. He passed away in captivity on the 19th of Iyar in the year 53. He was given a proper burial. He was not given a proper burial until the 14th of Adar in the year 67 of the 6th millennium. The 14th of Adar is Purim, right? So it seems like he was buried on Purim. Interesting. Okay. Now the other gravestone, which is right next to him, they buried him right on the right-hand side of Rabbi Meir. This gravestone was carved and erected for the benefactor Rabbi Alexander, son of Rabbi Solomon, who passed away on Yom Kippur, the 5th day of the week, and was buried on the 11th of Tishrei in the year 68 of the 6th millennium. So that was a year later. It was not a year. It was less than 6 months later. His heart desired, and God granted him the opportunity to perform a great mitzvah and redeem our master and teacher, Rabbi Meir, the son of Rabbi Baruch, who had been held in captivity for several years after his death, until the benefactor arose and redeemed him. He merited to be buried at Rabbi Meir's right side. May it be God's will that he be placed at Rabbi Meir's side in the Garden of Eden with the righteous of the world. Amen, 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 Selah. That's written on the gravestone. So you can go see it in Worms if you want. Now there's a legend that he asked to die, like he wanted to die to be with Rabbi Meir, like he was offered. Do you want a reward? This story is repeated. It's one of those legend stories in Jewish legend. And Rabbi Hillel of Parachur, one of the Chassidim, one of the great Chassidim, he even wrote his own Chassidus, not a Rebbe, but he's a major Chassid. He used to repeat this story that Rabbi Meir visited the benefactor, Alexander Wimpid, and asked him, do you want your reward in this world? Or do you want your reward in Olam Haba? Like, do you want to spend more time here or you want to spend it more? And he said, I'd rather be with you. So he died. But Rabbi Hillel of Parachur says that if he would have learned Chassidus, then there would have been the wrong decision. But since he didn't learn Chassidus yet, that was the right decision. That's how Rabbi Hillel of Parachur, just to put that in there. Okay, interesting. What?
A little plug.
Little plug for Chassidus. If someone offers you Olam Haba, to say no, you'd have to be pretty crazy. But Chassidus makes you pretty crazy. Yeah. Anyways, I mean, this is a watershed moment. Rabbi Meir, the death of Rabbi Meir was a big movement. Rabbi Usher, otherwise known as the Rush, was his student, and he ran away from Germany to Spain for fear of being imprisoned as well. And a few years later, the communities in Germany were completely destroyed and thousands were killed. Rabbi Meir's brother and his top students were all killed by pogroms. There were always pogroms in Germany. That community actually continued to exist until the modern era, but it never again reached the degree of prominence that it had during Rabbi Meir's life. Rabbi Meir's story is kind of the story of the entire Jewish history. The story of his imprisonment is a story of the great value that we place on our Jewish lives, right? That over the top value colliding with our values of our collective preservation of trying to keep and his heroism in putting that first it's a very incredible thing. Just a side discussion here. How is the actual value of a person measured, right? You're not supposed to pay more than someone's value. So historically, that was defined by the price of people on the slave markets. But there is also like how much would someone pay for their hostage if they weren't a Jewish person, right? That's really the way to assess it. Okay. Okay. So next, we talk about the captives of the crisis of 1648. Now, we all know Pre-Holocaust, there was another Holocaust. This was the Holocaust that really set the Jewish people back, in incredible, incredible ways. This is the type of thing. This is what happened. This is why. I mean, a lot of things came out of this. This is Tach V'Tat, right? The 1648. Have you guys heard of this? Oh, it happened during the month of Sivan, which it's such a big. That's why exactly. So every Shabbos Mevarchim, which is the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh, we omit a paragraph that talks about the persecution of the Jews. We don't say that paragraph because Rosh Chodesh is that week. Shabbos Mevarchim is a special Shabbos. It's a happier time. We don't say that paragraph except for the Shabbos before Nisan. So this past Shabbos we said that because of this Tach V'Tat massacre. Tach V'Tat is the Hebrew year. Yeah. So let's talk about what happened. I actually learned this in school from the primary sources, which I don't recommend looking at because they're horrendous. But the story is that you have Jews living in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which is a lot of the Jews living in Ukraine under the Poles, which is not then it was Poland. It's Ukraine, and there were basically two ethnic groups at the time. You had the Cossacks and the Tatars. Yeah, don't tell me you're a Tatar right now, because I'm not going to believe. Okay, no. Okay, so the Cossacks were worse by far. The difference is the Tatars were motivated by money. They were Muslims, and they were basically raid the Polish towns and everything, and take people captive. That was their thing. And they basically just raped, pillaged, and murdered, and just ransomed people left and right. They were in charge of the biggest slave market in the world, bigger than the Atlantic slave trade. The Tatars were the worst slavers, and they were brutal, horrible, horrible people. Very good that they don't exist nowadays. They really ruined the world. The Cossacks, what?
That's debatable. They
What?
exist in other sports.
I don't know. You should look what they do. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You know what? It is debatable. I take that back. But
That's what's in-
yeah. Okay. So, anyways, the status quo at the time was the Jewish people. They were okay. They were left alone by the Poles, right? They had their stuff, but they were basically. They worked for the Polish people. A lot of them they were in charge of administering the land, right? And they were actually, the ones kind of on top of the serfs and the people who were, paying their taxes and their debts. So the Jews were kind of holding debt for the Poles, and that was not a good position to be in, right? So, but ended up that the Cossacks riled up a giant nationalistic Ukrainian Orthodox Christian rebellion, right? Led by Khmelnytsky. Yeah. This guy Bogdan Khmelnytsky, he was the guy. We're going to take back our rights. We're not going to be subjugated to the Jews and to the Catholics, and we're going to destroy the system. And they were motivated by getting rid of all of their, all the problems. So they teamed up with the Tatars, who just sold to the highest bidder, basically. And the Cossacks were being paid, by the way, to protect the Poles against the Polish landowners against the Tatars, right? So the Cossacks hired the Tatars, and Khmelnytsky, Bogdan riled them all up, and they went on a scourge throughout, and the Jews got it the worst, right? Because the anger was directed at the Jews. And what they did to them, it was beyond horrendous, horrible. And by the way, he's still looked at as a national hero in Ukraine. This guy. Yeah. There's still statues of him. There's still things named after him. He's a national hero. He's like a General Lee in the South, I mean, you're right. It's not a perfect comparison, but for the black people in this country, that is a good comparison, right? Because, I mean, debatable. Fine. Either way, so they're surviving Jews. So lots were slaughtered. In the first-hand accounts, it says there's a whole lament written on page 167. You see parts of it. They left out all the gory details, but you know the you can go look up this full account. Rabbi Avram Ashkenazi, he was there. He witnessed this. Um, so they were slaughtering people very, very badly. They say that there was 100,000 people killed, right? But some historians say it was more like 50,000, and it's a little exaggerated. Hard to know. Either way, it was a big deal. But the people that survived, um, the people that survived were being sold. Why were they surviving? The Cossacks were there for blood. They were angry, vicious monsters. The Tartars wanted to sell people. They wanted money. So they took all the Jews that they captured and they sold them abroad. They sold them out. They shipped them out. So, um, so basically, one of the captives, his name was Rabbi Yaakov Koppel Margolis of Lodmir, and he actually describes the horrors of being taken captive with his son and daughter. This is very, very sad. He was led away in iron chains across the sea to the unknown, and he was overcome with feelings of helplessness and despair. Page 168, he described, the vicissitudes of time have carried me away. The evil decree that has befallen us in the land of Poland, we receive the results of heaven's decrees for us. Those destined for the sword, to the sword. Those destined for starvation, to starvation. And those destined for captivity, to captivity. This verse lists the fates in progressive order of severity. For captivity includes all of the previously mentioned sufferings. I was among the exiles taken captive with my son and daughter. We were led into exile in iron chains. My feet were bound in chains. They drove me and my children away from my family, from my father's house, and from my homeland to a foreign land. I have been banished from the inheritance of the holy ones. I said in my heart amidst my tears, who is with me? Who will be my tower of strength? Who in the heavens will spread his hands to take me and draw me from the raging waters? This is from Tehillim. Who do I have on foreign soil? Who will give me my refuge and shelter? Who will stand by me and help me like a friend, to be like a brother to me? They ended up sending him to Istanbul, which in Constantinople, which we learned about. Donna Garcia was living there. They have a very big Jewish community with a lot of Sephardi Jews who are descendants of the refugees from the expulsions of Spain and Portugal, right? So the rabbinic leaders of that community in Istanbul spearheaded an incredible rescue effort because they saw that the Tartars were showing up with boatloads of Jews. And so they said, we have to get these people off the slave ships. So they paid a fortune and redeemed thousands of these captives. Turn to Rabbi Margolis' description here. God grant, on page 170, God granted me mercy at the hands of virtuous people, the noble men of the land, who are generous, righteous, and pious people, descendants of saintly ancestors, compassionate folk, who are authentic descendants of the compassionate nation, the members of the holy Jewish community of Constantinople. Most prominent among these were the perfect sages who study Torah day and night, and who perform acts of kindness with the children of Israel who are being held by such harsh masters. These people redeemed me. May their homes be peaceful. May there be peace in their brethren, in their bastion, and life forevermore. So thousands of captive refugees continued to flood the city, and the Jews of Istanbul we could no longer keep up, right? There was just too much. They couldn't support them anymore. They ended up writing a letter to appeal for international Jewish support, right? There was no federation at the time, so they had to organize some international effort in order to help them to deal with this influx of people coming off over their shores. To get actually one of the figures that actually came up to help is Rabbi Menashe ben Yisrael of Amsterdam, who we learned about and who he made that song, right? No. Yeah, no, that's not no, Menashe ben Yisrael, someone else. He was the one who wrote it was the guy with the song, right? I don't remember.
Oh,
Now I'm
it's one of them too.
yeah, I don't remember. Either way, let's look at these rescue efforts are described to understand the magnitude here. They're writing for help. They're asking for help. We address ourselves to the two commanders of Israel's armies, quote unquote, distinguished in mitzvot and good deeds, renowned and praised individuals, unique in their excellence, in the illustrious Rabbi Zanvil Haz and the illustrious Rabbi Ber Oppenheim. May they live with strength and peace. Our souls grieved as we heard cries for help coming from our brethren, abducted from distant lands in the renowned city of Constantinople. The poor, oppressed captives from Poland are groaning in need. As load after load arrives in Constantinople, strained and distraught, the Constantinople community is unable to continue paying for their ransom because their kindness and righteousness have already reached beyond the heavens. They report that they have redeemed over 1,500 people, expending a vast fortune of over 150,000 reals. It said that about 100 reals, it's like 100 reals per person, which basically was the average slave that the Tartars sold. So they weren't charging the Jewish price. They were just charging what they averagely sold. But 100 reals was like a month's salary for like an expert. It sits in some other document. It's like for an expert craftsman or something, like a master craftsman. So it's a high salary. It's probably, let's say he made, it's millions of dollars we're talking, 150,000. What can they do now for the remaining survivors? The fresh arrivals who are impoverished and in iron chains, suffering under the hands of harsh masters, for the sum of the donations from these places is insufficient for their redemption. Seeing that the esteemed individuals responsible for the redemption of captives have turned to us, we feel that it is our duty to compose this letter of entreaty to your honors, asking that you seize this great mitzvah. We ask you to strive with generous hearts and fear of God to arrange that the leaders of your holy community send money to the city of Constantinople as quickly as possible. You may send it with whichever messenger you choose through our city, Venice. Hasten the redemption. This is not from Constantinople. I misspoke. This is from the people, the Jews in Venice. The multitude whose eyes look out desperately for your charity. The matter cannot stand delay. Yeah. Anyways, so in the summer of 1651, the Aboab brothers report that this is written by the Aboab brothers. They were big activists and in the Jewish world in general. So they were writing that there were 1,500 people saved so far. Eventually, they did get a lot of donations in, and they ended up saving about from 4,000 to 6,000 people, which is incredible. And specifically of note was the Jewish community of Turkey. That even non-Jewish observers noticed this, that the Jewish people were being, like, there was this incredible thing to note, to watch, how the Jewish people were coming together to pool their resources and give everything in order to buy. You don't have other people are not rushing to being bought by to be ransomed from the Tatars, whatever. So this. It's described by a non-Jew in 1640 on page text 14. Amongst themselves, the Jews are extremely charitable. They take great care of the poor, adding to the price of meat 1 sol per pound. This is like a French, I think this was in France, right? By the end of the year, this makes a large sum. So they basically put a tax on every Jew. The community had to pay. Whenever they bought meat, they had to add the pound was not the pound of meat, but pound of money that they paid, right? The money was the pound. So they had to add on top of their purchase. By the end of the year, there was a large sum which was used for feeding and supporting the poor, as well as ransoming Jewish slaves, whom the Turks and the Tatars take in addition to the Poles. As a result, there are no Jews in the Sultan's galleys, apart from those convicted of crimes. Incredible. So now, to think about this for a minute, you have people who are coming from a different place. They don't speak the same language even. They have different, they're Jews, but ultimately their cultures are very different. One speaks Yiddish and they eat gefilte fish. The other one is eating hamin and they're speaking Ladino, right? Very different. But they feel a tremendous bond that easily and obviously transcends those differences. It's not that simple though. We take it for granted. Where does this bond originate from? What creates and maintains it and strengthens it? Right? And the answer is page 175 from Adam Teller, a historian. The connection between Jews derived from the Torah. Without that, the connection between the Sephardi Jews of the Mediterranean world and the Ashkenazi Jews of Eastern Europe would have been tenuous. After all, they spoke different languages, practiced different rituals and customs, had different historical experiences from at least the 10th century, and understood their place in the world in different ways. Ashkenazis were much more sheltered and ghettoized, and the Sephardis were, having Sephardi parties in the palace. And understood their place in the world in different ways. It was their understanding of belonging to a single religiously defined people, chosen by God and forged by the experience at Mount Sinai, that allowed the Jews in the 17th century to feel connected with each other over great distances. It's an incredible thing. It's really something you don't see anywhere else. And it's because of their shared Torah connection and the values we talk about in the beginning of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, kol Yisrael ha'revim zeh b'zeh. All those things, it gives not the basic level of caring about another person, right? That we have for every human being, but when you see that to someone you're gonna give all your money away, empty out your retirement accounts to get a guy off a ship because he's a Jew. And the root of that connection is Torah and mitzvos. Taking it to the contemporary, there is a contemporary halachic discussion about the hostages that we have to deal with in the state of Israel has to deal with, and there's always a lot of moral issues, and the rabbis have lots of responsa on this topic. It's a very complex topic. It is not simple whatsoever. How much do we pay for hostages, right? So you can see on, yes, obviously, we know that our values are very strong. But there's a lot written on page 178. You see all the halachic responsum or the different sources about this. There's the Talmud, there's the Tosfos, there's the Shulchan Aruch, there's the idea of a state of war. I'll summarize it briefly. It's a very long topic, happens to be, but basically the basic principle is obviously it's the biggest mitzvah in the world, but you're not allowed to pay too much because it puts more Jews at risk, right? Now we're not being asked to pay anything here. We're talking about people's trading prisoners, okay? And we're also it's a little different because when they're taking our hostages, their hostages are in mortal danger, right? That law prohibiting paying more does not include, according to the halacha that we hold, the Alter Rebbe, and most of the modern day halachic decision makers hold, that if the guy's in danger, you have to get him out. It doesn't matter how much you have to pay. Because that calculation does not apply to an imminent threat to someone's life. Imminent threats to someone's life will trump the possibility that more people will be kidnapped. First of all. Second of all, hey, hello? Sure. You could put it in the kitchen. I'll take it later. So the imminent danger is much more compelling, according to Tosfos and other people. Not everyone agrees with this, but this is the halacha today. However, what about releasing prisoners who are going to kill thousands of Jews when they get released? That's a different story. Gilad Shalit's story, right? Yahya Sinwar was released along with a bunch of other terrorists who killed more people when they got released. Yahya Sinwar killed a lot more people. So that is a very, very, very hard. Thank you. That is a very, very hard decision to make, and the Rebbe addressed it, but he didn't. The Rebbe did not say yes or no. He said ask the halachic authorities, but He didn't like that Israel negotiated from a position of weakness. That was the Rebbe's main thing. You're always negotiating from a position of weakness, and they see it, and you're always going to pay more for that. And that's where the Rebbe wanted it. He talked about the fact that they always lose wars because of that. They always give in. That was the Rebbe's more emphasis.
Is there any of the that at all?
No. All the rabbis, all the Rabbanim said, Rav Ovadia Yosef, all of them said to make deals. To make deals, even though it seems like it is having a negative impact. But when push comes to shove, they cared more about that one life. Even though, yes, the Rabbanim were asked permission by the government. They wanted to know. It wasn't just, they're secular, but they're asking, or no one's really secular, but they asked Rav Ovadia Yosef, and they asked Rav Moshe gave a tshuva on it, Rav Asher Weiss gave a tshuva. By the way, it happens to be that during a time of war, there's different considerations. You see, in Rav Herschel Schachter talks about that. There's something called when you're in a state of war, individual rights are lessened. Meaning, why are you allowed to put a soldier's life at risk, right? Because obviously you have to fight a war. The country needs to fight a war. So the hostage, so the halacha really is that in a state of war, hostages are not prioritized. It depends on how it will benefit the war or not. So you have to always put the country's survival first. So that has to be weighed. So the military analysts have to be asked, will this hurt us security-wise or not? That's really halachically the responsibility in a war. It's not so simple, because if the morale of the soldiers is lowered, this is the conversation. I'm just giving you some of the points in the conversation. If the morale is lowered, if you just leave soldiers there who are kidnapped, they're going to be, no, they're not, the policy of Israel is we don't leave anyone. And that gives a morale boost. That gives them a much better chance of fighting well. And it's just the country's spirit and the country that this is, who we are. And that's a part of the war as well. Morale is a very big piece. So you have to weigh all of these things. So, yeah.
When you say there are halakhic sources, I mean, are these opinions based on, do they cite Talmud and Torah
Yeah.
for this?
Yeah, there's not that much on it.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
It's a little bit there's a paucity of sources, but there are halachic perspectives. Like we said, we have the values of when does lo samod al dam reyecha apply? Do not stand on your fellow's blood. When does that apply? When are you not? What this time of war situation? It's that there is a source for that. But yes, they're not amazing sources. This isn't a very well developed area of halacha, because we never had a state, and in a way that we had a military and a war situation. So all these things are very hard to really pin down in a very clear, obvious sense. Yeah.
This is from the book.
This is from the court. No, this is in this course.
That you just talked about was from Ethics of Our Fighters, I think?
It's not, no, because this is from the responsum from, these are from the responsum of those
So
rabbis.
Do they
Yeah.
cite the actual,
The responsum?
do they cite the Talmud?
Yeah, everything should be there. And on page one, not everything, but page 178 has,
Well, they don't go back to the original source. I'm not
Yeah,
asking to.
no, there are. You don't have them?
But-
You don't have the Tosfos 6858A?
Oh, sure.
You don't have the
No,
Nachmanides
I
46?
have the reference, they don't have the.
Oh.
actual writing.
Okay, so we gotta look up the reference.
Gotta help with it.
Yeah, I wanted to. This is not part of the thing. I put this in here, so don't sue the authors of this course if you don't like this. What I'm about to show you, but a lot of this has to do with. We talked about the values that enable the Jewish people to feel this connection to each other, to go above and beyond anything really humanly thought capable of caring about each other. Right, we're transcending a certain level of selfishness, and that is, we said, empowered by the Torah, empowered by this belief in Jewish connection to each other. In the recent conflict, again talking about the temporary, right? The groundswell of support of the Jewish people of each other was incredible. Yet what we were doing for each other, people were doing everything, money, volunteering, mitzvos, tzitzis, sending packages, incredible, incredible stuff. There was a certain amount of younger Jews, and some of them not so young, who were joining the anti-Israel, the Hamas protests of the encampments, the Jews for Palestine, etc., etc., etc. And a rabbi in New York, Rabbi Emil Hirsch, he's a Zionist reform rabbi. He noticed that a lot of these people were coming out of reform institutions. And he gave a sermon that went viral. He was one of the rabbis who actually made the reform movement Zionist to begin with. No, this is filmed on Yom Kippur, but once it's filmed, so it happens to be, yeah, he was one of what? He's with the synagogue. He's
Somebody was part of it. Okay, that's fine.
he's on the Council of Reform Rabbis, but he's one of the, yeah, he's a very big personality, but he was so Reform is originally anti-Zionist because the idea of Zionism is that Jewish people should have their own identity. Now, religious Jews have an identity. It's the Torah. It's not a state. But regardless of that, Reform was against the idea of Jewish people being separate to begin with. So they were anti-Zionist. Then they became Zionists later. He, in 1992, was one of the people who even created that notion that Reform is pro-Israel. So he's one of the originators in 1992 that Reform officially accepts the state of Israel. So now he's always been fighting against that being reversed.
Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh. All Jews are responsible one for the other, the sages. And if you do not feel this special bond with other Jews, you're emotionally damaged. Jews, the weakening of these bonds is my central concern regarding the future.
By the way, the reason why it's called the Free Synagogue is because he demanded that his sermons would not be looked over by the board.
Have you ever read, he wrote a book with an Orthodox rabbi, One People, Two Worlds.
I didn't read that.
It's quite fascinating.
Check it out.
Because they argue.
It's
It's hard for me to hear, Steve.
You can't hear it?
I can't
You
hear
can-
the guy very well.
Oh,
Maybe, well,
not much I
whatever.
can do.
But
Okay.
those perhaps watch this online at some point. I love your generation. I think you're amazing. You're our future. As your teachers, educators, rabbis, and moral guides, know that we tried to instill in you a sense of justice, righteousness, virtue, honor, rectitude, honesty, and decency for all people. We are proud when your generation is active in pursuance of these values. And if these ideals lead you to be critics of Israeli policies or the American Jewish community, so be it. What we did not intend is for your generation to turn your backs on our people. We wanted you to be Zionists. We did not intend that our emphasis on tikkun olam, social repair, would lead some Jews to join anti-Israel demonstrations. We did not intend for American Jews to lead Passover Seders in so-called liberated zones, liberated from Zionists, that violate not only university policies, but threaten the safety of Jew students. We did not intend to encourage or excuse Jews who burn American flags or support those who do. The supreme leader of Iran sent messages of support and thanks to student protesters. That tells you everything you need to know. While America often falls short of its ideals, still, our values and aspirations are far better than our enemies. And we are blessed to live in this country. We did not intend to strip all Jewish solidarity, empathy, responsibility, and mutuality from the Jewish identity of so many young American Jews, not only towards Israeli civilians, but soldiers your age who exhibit the most astonishing courage and remarkable self-sacrifice, many of whom have laid down their lives protecting our people in fates of enormous heroism. We thought that we were conveying the principles of Jewish universalism. We thought we were instilling in our young people our yearnings for peace and justice and righteousness and truth. We did not expect the Jewish spirit to dribble away
You could,
while we thought we were passing it on.
Oops.
yeah,
Oh.
I mean, that he said it himself, by instilling, by the reform movement going through for Jewish universalism is, actually, they have, maybe it wasn't intended, but it was.
That's exactly what.
Yeah, a lot, and completely logical consequence of Jewish values are all universal.
They took it for granted that Jewish people feel connected to each other. They took it for granted that throughout history, we always had each other's backs and
No
throughout,
matter what they,
And like
Yeah.
you said,
what the teaching is.
the only
Right.
way we're connected is through Torah.
and that's
Yeah.
exactly the point we're
If you
making
don't
here.
believe that there's Torah,
Then.
I mean, yeah. and
Yeah.
There wasn't the Torah.
He's famous for this.
And the
actually.
problem is, by the way, thinking that you can replace that
Mm.
with the state. Because the second you disagree with the state,
Problem.
it's exactly, you have a problem. And people do disagree with the state. They don't like the way that they're treating the people there.
Yeah.
So now that's my identity. That's my connection to you. I don't like that state. So
Right,
no more
exactly.
Judaism.
What are you left with?
exactly. So there's no continuity.
So that's why I showed it. It wasn't just, okay.
Yeah, that's why I showed it, because he made the point that I was making, that this course was making, you know. And on a contrast, to end on a higher note, the heroism that we saw in the hostages. Look at Agam Berger.
Yeah.
Agam Berger, she was always a very special person, but she was inspiring the women that she was in captivity with. She was braiding their hair so that when they went onto stage, when they were released, she was not released with them, but she said, you're going to look put together for that when they go out. You're not going to look destroyed. It came out later because when those captives went and they told her father that she wishes you a happy birthday, first of all, which is incredible, and the father was shocked. She also said that she is keeping Shabbos.
I learned.
She's keeping Shabbos in there because they forced her to cook. Hamas forced her to cook for them, and she cooked every day of the week. And on Shabbos, she said, "No, I'm not cooking for you." Can you imagine? She's 19 years old. She didn't even grow up keeping Shabbos. Her mother kept Shabbos after her grandmother died in remembrance of her grandmother, and she didn't realize that her mother was even doing that. So her mother became Shomer Shabbos, and then she's keeping Shabbos in captivity. Not just that, it came out later when she came out that she refused to eat meat. The meat that they gave them pitas and hummus every day, but if they gave them meat, she didn't eat it. She fasted on Tisha B'Av. This is the strength. This is incredible. She not just that she kept religious. That's not the point. The point is that she saw herself as above the situation in such a way that transcended the circumstances she was in. She did not see Hamas as something that was able to dictate and take away who she was. She told them, "No, I'm not cooking for you on Shabbos." Incredible. And that's and she's that this is the Jewish spirit. Anyways, that's really a wrap of the course, and we'll see the key points of all of it. Any more questions before we see the key points? Okay.
1. Courageous converts. Narratives. 1. Onkelos was born into the Roman royal family shortly after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in the 1st century CE. Attracted to the revolutionary Jewish concepts of a single God who cares for his people and guides them, Onkelos risked his life to convert to Judaism. He became the author of the first translation of the Torah, a monumental work studied until today. 2. Long-lost documents uncovered in the Cairo Geniza capture the fascinating story of an Italian priest named Johannes, who converted to Judaism in the early 12th century. Johannes became Ovadia and was forced to flee his home country in order to live as a Jew. He endured wanderings and difficulties in his life, but he enriched Jewish worship with his liturgical music. 3. Valentine Potocki was the brilliant young son of a Polish nobleman who converted to Judaism in the mid-18th century. Known by the Jewish name Avraham ben Avraham, he was arrested by the authorities in Lithuania and sentenced to death. He steadfastly refused offers to save his life if he returned to Christianity, and he went to his execution joyfully. The story of his incredible dedication and sacrifice has inspired generations of Jews. General points. 1. Unique among world religions, Judaism does not believe that non-Jews need to join it, and potential converts are actively dissuaded. Nevertheless, Judaism does accept converts who are persistent, with the understanding that these people possess a latent Jewish soul. 2. Converts to Judaism are considered to possess particularly powerful souls. Over the generations, converts have made unique contributions to Jewish life. Lesson 2. Influential Jews.
Do we want to watch this whole thing?
Narratives.
Go to 4.
1.
Oh, just go to 4.
Rabbi by King Rudolf I of Germany and held of Israel. 10th century.
So the real question is.
To become spiritually self-sufficient and ushering in a new era of Jewish scholarship and history. 2. Rabbi Meir of Rottenburg was the leading rabbinic authority in Germany in the 13th century. As government persecution of the Jews worsened, he led a daring attempt to escape Germany and settle in the land of Israel. Imprisoned by King Rudolf I of Germany and held for ransom, Rabbi Meir prevented the community from paying the requested sum, citing a Talmudic enactment against overpaying for captives in order to disincentivize future hostage-taking. 3. In 1648, the Cossacks and Tatars launched a joint revolt against the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth that ruled Ukraine. Tens of thousands of Jews were killed in anti-Semitic pogroms, and thousands of Jews were taken captive for sale on the Istanbul slave market. The Jews of Istanbul launched an international Jewish relief effort and successfully ransomed the large majority of the captives. General points. 1. Jewish law deems redeeming captives the greatest mitzvah possible. However, some restrictions are placed on the price that can be paid for ransom in order to avoid incentivizing future hostage-taking. 2. Jewish communities around the world have been historically able to mobilize on behalf of redeeming their captive brethren because they have felt a deep connection and responsibility for each other. The roots of this unity are their shared Torah and mitzvot. 3. Jewish law and history provide experience and guidance for dealing with hostage situations. This background arms us with insight and perspective for navigating the complex dilemmas raised by contemporary terrorist hostage situations.
Hey, thank you guys for joining this course. I don't know what the next course is, so I'll figure
So do you
surprise you. Yes.
comment on whether